Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to break down the highly engineered financial machine behind the $71 billion global cruise industry. When you look at a modern megaship, you probably just see a vacation destination. But what you're actually looking at is one of the most complex, highly leveraged mathematical equations in modern business. Today, we're going to explore the fascinating economics of owning a cruise ship. We'll look at everything from the staggering upfront costs all the way to the razor-thin margins that determine whether these floating cities sink or swim financially. Okay, let's dive right into this with a number that's honestly just staggering. $2 billion. That is the baseline entry price just to build a modern megaship like Royal Caribbean's Icon of the Seas. And no, that's not a typo. That is simply what you have to pay just to exist in this business at a competitive level. Think about it. You're building a self-contained, moving city that's almost as long as the Empire State Building is tall. It has to generate its own power, treat its own sewage, and feed thousands of people. And buying this $2 billion asset means taking on massive 12 to 15-year loans that instantly generate tens of millions of dollars in annual interest obligations. So to really understand this business, we need to map out the life cycle of a dollar across 5 critical phases: the billion-dollar entry price, the daily burn rate, the onboard revenue machine, economies of massive scale, and finally, the cost of crisis. Let's start with part 1, the billion-dollar entry price and financing a floating city. So how exactly do they offset this massive mountain of debt from day one? Well, they use a vital, totally legal loophole called a flag of convenience. Even though these companies operate out of American cities like Miami, they register their ships in places like the Bahamas, Panama, or Bermuda. In fact, over 200 cruise ships currently fly the Bahamian flag. It's a straightforward business decision that saves these cruise lines millions of dollars every single year, money that would otherwise go to the U.S. government in corporate taxes, while also drastically lowering their overall regulatory burden. And this brilliantly illustrates how those strategic savings trickle all the way down to labor. By operating under these foreign laws, cruise lines can staff their 2,300-person cruise under a vastly different economic structure. Entry-level crew members, who are often recruited from the Philippines, Indonesia, and Eastern Europe, typically work 8 to 10-month contracts with literally 0 days off. A standard contract requires a mandatory 308 hours per month. When you do the math, that brings the hourly rate to somewhere between $1.62 and $2.27. So they're legally paying wages that would be completely illegal in the United States, but are perfectly fine under the flag the ship flies. Which brings us to part 2, the daily burn rate, or what we can call the pressure to exist. Getting the ship built, financed, and staffed is really just step 1. Now we have to look at the staggering fixed costs required just to keep the lights on. A 250,000-ton megaship burns approximately $920,000 every single day. Fuel is the biggest expense outside of labor, costing up to $150,000 a day. Food for thousands of people, that runs about $112,000 daily, and they only keep it that low because they buy raw ingredients in massive bulk and have somehow figured out how to feed 6,000 people at a buffet without going totally bankrupt. Add import fees, maintenance, and the comprehensive insurance needed for a $2 billion asset, and you hit that near $1 million mark. But here's the real kicker. They pay this $920,000 every single day, whether the ship is packed full, totally empty, sailing, or just sitting at the dock. And keep in mind that near $1 million daily burn happens before the cruise line has collected a single dollar of actual revenue from passengers. It creates this immense daily financial pressure cooker. Every morning they wake up, they are nearly $1 million in the hole. So how do they dig out of that hole? That's part 3, the onboard revenue machine and the trap of the cheap ticket. To survive that daily burn rate, cruise lines have designed an ingeniously calibrated environment. A lot of people look at a cheap $400 ticket for a week-long Caribbean cruise and wonder, how on earth does the company make money? Well, the truth is, that ticket is a structural loss leader. It's a product sold at a loss, just to get you in the door. After paying travel agent commissions and port fees, the cruise line might actually be taking a negative margin on your ticket. See, the ticket is the bait, and you are the fish. The entire goal is to get you onto the ship where you're a completely captive consumer, literally surrounded by the ocean, and then turn you into someone who happily drops $800 or more on drinks, Wi-Fi, excursions, and hitting the casino. Because once you're aboard, the math flips dramatically in favor of the house. Just looking at Royal Caribbean's 2024 data, they generated $16.48 billion in total revenue.
A massive 30% of that, which is $4.3 billion, came strictly from onboard spending. And the profit margins here are just extraordinary. Think about an all-inclusive drink package. It might cost a passenger $90 a day, but because the cruise line buys alcohol in bulk at wholesale rates, their gross margins on beverage sales exceed 80%. And here is the real genius of it all. They've engineered this perfect commercial environment where nearly 50% of this highly profitable onboard revenue is locked in through their app before you even pack your bags.
Let's move to part 4, economies of massive scale. Essentially, bigger ships equal bigger profits. This brings us to the exact reason these floating cities keep getting larger and larger, the sheer economic power of massive scale. Think about it for a second. Whether you have 2,000 passengers or 6,000 passengers, you still only have one bridge, one set of senior officers to pay, and one hull to paint. Because larger ships drastically drive down the daily fixed operational cost per passenger, the industry has consolidated into a staggering oligopoly. Just 3 mega corporations, Carnival, Royal Caribbean, and Norwegian, control over 72% of the global market. They alone have the scale to spread costs and the negotiating power to buy fuel and food at rates that no smaller operator could ever dream of achieving. To truly maximize this dominance, these companies use perfect vertical integration. They funneled their massive passenger loads directly into completely private islands. Royal Caribbean spent hundreds of millions transforming a Bahamian beach into Perfect Day at Coco Cay, and that single island is projected to generate over $600 million in direct revenue in 2026. Disney's Castaway Cay paid over $220 million in dividends over a decade. When you rent a cabana for $1,000 on one of these islands, there are no independent tour operators or local restaurants to compete with. 100% of that money goes directly back to the parent corporation's balance sheet. There is zero revenue leakage. Absolutely nothing escapes to local businesses. The house captures the whole shebang. But let's look at part 5, the cost of crisis. What exactly happens when the math breaks? Because this entire machine is so highly leveraged and relies on near-perfect conditions, the structural vulnerabilities are absolutely catastrophic when things go wrong. Look how quickly a billion-dollar asset turns into a massive liability. In 2013, the Carnival Triumph suffered an engine fire traced back to a fuel leak from a single diesel generator that was overdue for maintenance. The result? Total loss of power and sanitation systems. Over 4,200 people were left adrift in the Gulf of Mexico for 5 days in incredibly primitive conditions. Beyond the refunds and the lawsuits, this one incident forced Carnival to commit over $500 million in fleet-wide fire prevention upgrades and spend another $200 million completely rebuilding the ship itself. But honestly, even that disaster pales in comparison to what happened in March 2020. When the CDC issued its no-sail order, the entire global fleet just halted. But remember those fixed costs we talked about earlier? The ship still needed fuel, they still needed insurance, debt payments, and skeleton crews. Carnival Corporation found itself burning through an unbelievable $650 million every single month, with 0 passengers and absolutely 0 revenue coming in. To survive losing an average of $28 million a day in 2020, they had to borrow, and borrow heavily. Carnival's debt load exploded from $12 billion pre-pandemic up to a staggering $32 billion by 2023. Even with profitability recovering today, that debt casts a massive shadow. Interest expenses alone now consume $1.35 billion annually. That's 6 times their 2019 rate. It's a massive structural vulnerability, where just one more sudden shock could easily make that debt a death sentence. Ultimately, it all comes down to a razor-thin line. In a fantastic year, running at 108% occupancy, which, by the way, is possible because some cabins hold more than 2 people, a megaship might clear $40 million in annual profit. But if occupancy drops to just 70% because of a recession, a bad hurricane season, or a disease scare, or hey, if fuel prices simply spike by 20%, the revenue drops, but those massive fixed costs, they stay exactly the same. That $40 million profit instantly flips into a $10 to $30 million annual loss per ship. The gap between a stellar year and a devastating one is remarkably small. So the next time you see one of these billion-dollar floating cities sailing past the horizon, you're not just looking at a vacation. You're looking at a highly leveraged machine, expertly designed to convert your relaxation into their profit. It is an incredible feat of economics and engineering. Which leaves us with one final thought regarding this massive scale and immense debt burden. The math proves that in this carefully engineered environment, the house always wins. But what happens when the house sinks? Thanks for joining me on this explainer. I hope this completely changes how you view your next vacation on the open ocean.